Is everybody ready to resume? Okay. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. I will now present the Mortgage Survey Report. What is the Mortgage Survey Report? Since the 80s, the Rent Guidelines Board has been conducting the Mortgage Survey, which gives a sample view of the lending market faced by borrowers. The board is required by the rent stabilization law to consider the costs and availability of financing in its deliberations. In compliance with the law, each January we send out surveys to financial institutions that underwrite mortgages for multifamily properties in New York City. The survey covers 4 main areas: new and refinance loans, underwriting criteria, non-performing loans, and the characteristics of buildings in lenders' portfolios. The survey findings are collected in the Mortgage Survey Report, which highlights changes in the New York City multifamily lending market during the prior year. The report is divided into 3 sections: the cross-sectional analysis, which looks at all the respondents; a longitudinal analysis, which looks at only those lenders responding in both the current and prior year; and in addition to the survey analysis, we will also examine rent-stabilized building sales data. Each winter, the RGB surveys institutions that offer loans for multiple dwelling rent-stabilized properties in the city. The survey sample is updated annually to include only those institutions that continue to offer new and refinance mortgages. 12 responses, up from 10 last year, were received from the 27 surveys mailed this year, a 44% participation rate. Before going into detail, I'll give you a brief summary of our key findings. Interest rates charged on loans decreased this year. Upfront fees, called points, for mortgages also decreased. Vacancy and collection losses declined. Lending volume for both new and refinance loans increased. Maximum loan-to-value ratios remained stable. And in our analysis of building sales data, the number of rent-stabilized buildings sold in 2015 remained virtually unchanged from the prior year. Average interest rates decreased this year. This year's average interest rate for multifamily mortgages was 3.97%, a decrease of 0.3 percentage point, or 7% from the previous year. This was the lowest interest rate in the history of our survey. This graph shows average interest rates charged for new mortgages over the past 3.5 decades. As the graph illustrates, interest rates were once significantly higher, residing in the double digits throughout the 1980s, and then fell to the single digits since the 90s. This year, average interest rates, as I said, declined to their lowest level in our survey's history, 3.97%. Points, which are upfront service fees, decreased this year and also fell to a record low. The average service fee charged on new loans by lenders was 0.42, down from last year's average of 0.70. Among survey respondents, average points this year ranged between 0 and 1, with 5 surveyed lenders charging no points on loans. This graph shows the average points charged for new mortgages since the early 80s. After averaging between 1 and 3 points in the 1980s and 90s, average fees have been below 1 point since 2000, and like I said, they fell to their lowest level in our survey's history, 0.42 this year. The average volume of both new and refinance mortgage originations rose this year, primarily due to the addition of a couple of large lenders to the survey this year that didn't respond the previous year. An average of 104 new loans per institution were financed on it this year. That was 113% more than the 49 average the previous year. Totaling up the number of new loans made by surveyed lenders, it equaled 1,038. Similarly, the average number of refinance loans more than doubled, rising 110% to 96 this year. And totaling up the number of refinance loans made by surveyed lenders, it was 1,061. Lenders surveyed, for the most part, remained flexible in the loan terms borrowers were offered. Since survey respondents typically provide a wide range of terms rather than a single number, we can't give a precise average, but they did remain similar to those offered in recent years. Mortgage terms reported by lenders fell within a wide 5 to 30-year range. 3 lenders offered terms as long as 30 years, while one offered a maximum of 7 years. This year's lenders, on average, maintain their lending standards from the prior year. For all institutions, the typical maximum loan-to-value ratio, that is, the maximum dollar amount respondents were willing to lend based on a building's value, ranged between 65 and 83%. The average was 74.0%, unchanged from the prior year. The debt service ratio, which is the net operating income divided by the debt service, was virtually the same this year, with an average debt service requirement of 1.21 versus 1.22 the prior year. Overall, just 2 surveyed lenders reported making changes in their underwriting standards since last year. This graph illustrates lenders' standards for maximum loan-to-value ratios since 1996, when we started asking this question. It peaked in 2007, and it declined to its lowest point in 2013. It rose again the following 2 years, and this year it remained unchanged at 74%. Respondents were asked whether their new financing rates, refinancing rates, loan-to-value ratio, and debt service coverage requirements for rent-stabilized properties were higher, lower, or the same as for other properties. Every lender but 2 reported that standards were no different for rent-stabilized buildings than for non-stabilized properties in all 3 categories. More lenders reported that they had non-performing loans this year, though they represented a smaller proportion of their portfolios. 3 lenders reported having non-performing loans, up from 1 the prior year. These loans made up 0.2% of their portfolios this year, compared to 5% for the 1 lender last year. And like last year, not a single lender reported any foreclosures this year. The typical size of buildings in lenders' portfolios varied widely. The most commonly reported building size was either 11 to 19 units or 100 or more units, with 25% of lenders reporting either. The remaining lenders were evenly divided between either having an average of 1 to 10 units typically, 20 to 49 units, or 50 to 99 units. 17% of lenders reporting one of those. Average operating and maintenance expenses and average rents among buildings in lenders' portfolios went in opposite directions among surveyed lenders since last year. Expenses rose 9% to $650 per unit, while average rents fell 19% to an average of $1,191 per unit per month. Because average costs rose and rents fell, the average cost-to-rent ratio increased to 54.5%. From 40.5% last year. Average vacancy and collection losses decreased for the 5th time in the last 6 years, down from 3.25% to 3.14% this year. That was the lowest level recorded in the history of our survey. Similarly, a lower proportion of lenders reported average losses of 5% or more this year, down from 20% last year to 18% this year. And all but 1 surveyed lender this year reported that buildings in their portfolio contain commercial space, though the average number varies depending on the lender. On average, lenders reported that 28% of their portfolios contain commercial space, down slightly from 30% the prior year. This graph illustrates vacancy and collection losses over the last 2 decades, with the most recent year on top. And the earliest year we've collected this data, 1996 at the bottom. It's ranged between 3 and 5% throughout. In recent years, vacancy collections have mostly fallen, including this year, declining to its lowest level ever, 3.14%. This survey asked lenders also about their portfolio's performance compared with expectations at the time of initial loan origination with regard to NOI, debt service coverage, and expenses. Lenders reported an overall improvement from last year, with the vast majority of lenders indicating that their expectations had been met or exceeded in all 3 areas among their rent-stabilized portfolios. Specifically, at least 82% said expectations were equaled or exceeded for all three categories, up from 2/3 of lenders last year. The survey also asks lenders whether they retain their mortgages or sell them to secondary markets. Among the lenders, all but 3 retain all their mortgages, about the same proportion as the prior year. Now we'll move on briefly to the longitudinal analysis, which examines findings among institutions that responded to our survey both last year and this year. 9 out of 12 lenders responded in both years and make up our longitudinal sample. The average interest rate among the longitudinal group for new loans as of February of this year was 4.21%, virtually the same as a year earlier when the average interest rate was 4.20%. Among the longitudinal group, average points offered by lenders were also virtually unchanged at 0.50 this year versus 0.51 last year. The average maximum loan-to-value ratio fell this year, decreasing to 73.6% among the longitudinal group compared to 74.7% last year. The average debt service ratio was virtually unchanged at 1.21 this year versus 1.22 last year. Unlike the cross-sectional analysis, vacancy and collection losses among the longitudinal group rose to 3.22% this year compared to 3.06% last year. And looking at the rate of delinquencies among the longitudinal group, 2 lenders reported non-performing loans this year compared to 1 last year. And examining foreclosures, as was mentioned earlier in the cross-sectional sample, there were no reported foreclosures among any of the lenders this year. This table shows a comparison between select categories in this year's cross-sectional study, which is on the top, and the longitudinal data, which is on the bottom. Since there are 3 fewer lenders in the longitudinal sample this year, there is a sizable difference between the 2 samples. Among the longitudinal group, it shows higher interest rates, points, and vacancy and collection losses, but lower loan volumes and maximum LTV ratios, while the debt service ratio is the same in both groups. Next, we'll move on to our analysis of rent-stabilized building sales data. About 9 years ago, the Department of Finance began offering online public property sales information. Using this data, we have analyzed rent-stabilized building sales in each of the last 8 mortgage survey reports. And this year, we follow up with a look at data from calendar year 2015 and compare it to the prior year. In 2015, 1,361 buildings containing rent-stabilized units were sold in New York City, little different from the prior year when 5 fewer buildings were sold, 0.4% difference. However, the change in sales volume did vary by borough. In Manhattan, sales rose the most, rising 11% from 2014 to 2015, while in the Bronx, sales declined the most, falling 13%. In between were Brooklyn, with sales up slightly, 1%, and Queens with sales down 3%. And just as a note, as in prior years, Staten Island is not included at all in this analysis because there are too few stabilized building sales in that borough. Of the 1,361 buildings reported to have been sold in 2015, they do represent about 76% of the number of buildings that received new mortgages as reported by our surveyed lenders this year. Looking at sales data by building size, it varied. Among the smallest sized rent-stabilized buildings sold in 2015, 6 to 10 units, sales volume fell 3%. However, among 11 to 19 unit buildings, it rose 14%. Among 20 to 99 unit buildings, sales volume was minimally changed, falling 1%. But among the largest buildings containing 100 or more units, sales rose 6% from the prior year. This graph illustrates over the last 13 years that sales peaked in 2005 when 1,816 stabilized buildings were sold in the city. However, by 2009, sales volume declined to 521. Since then, sales volume has increased most years, but held steady this past year at 1,356 buildings sold. Now we'll shift to the sales prices of buildings in 2015. Citywide, the median sales price of rent-stabilized buildings was $3.8 million. By borough, the highest median sales price was in Manhattan, at close to $7.2 million, followed by the Bronx, almost $3.3 million. Brooklyn, the median was $2.5 million, and Queens about $1.6 million. Looking at sales prices by building size, among the smallest buildings containing 6 to 10 units, median sales prices citywide were $1.6 million. Among 11 to 19 unit buildings, the median price was about $3.5 million. Among 20 to 99 unit buildings, the median price was a little over $7 million. And among the largest building categories, which contain 100 or more units, the median sales price was almost $33 million. So, to sum up the major findings of the 2016 Mortgage Survey Report, we found that both interest rates and service fees fell to their lowest rate in the history of the survey, as did vacancy and collection losses, and lending terms remained favorable to borrowers. In addition, the number of rent-stabilized buildings sold this past year remained stable. Thank you. I will now take any questions you might have.
Thank you. Questions? Scott?
Thanks, Brian. Just remind us, how, I know in past years we've discussed, one problem has been getting people to respond to this survey. How many respondents did we get this year versus prior years?
Well, we did increase it from 2 last year, which was a low point in our survey, the number. We did do more outreach, and we reached out to different organizations. Steve was helpful in giving us some guidance in that. Thank you. And we lost one surveyed lender from the previous year who didn't have any loans this year into multifamily stabilized buildings. So we are reaching out to more and more, and but there's no requirement that they do it, and sometimes they don't want to share the information, so we unfortunately can't force them. But we used to have a lot more surveyed lenders, but the market has consolidated as well over the years. We do have 2 lenders that we surveyed this year who are merging with one.
But how many do we have total?
10.
10. Okay, so it's a very small sample. 12.
I'm sorry, 12. We had 10 last year. 12, yes, I'm
12
sorry.
in the longitudinal sample, so 12.
9 in the longitudinal.
9 in the longitudinal, 12 in the total. I think for the chair, this is kind of in our laundry list of things where we have a very limited scope of what we're here for, but we don't have any teeth to require lenders of certain size or who do business with the city to participate in this survey. So I appreciate your efforts, but I also understand the limitations of what you can do.
I would like just to point out one thing, though. Of the surveys, folks we surveyed, they did have over 1,000 loans for new origination, and their building sales list had about 1,300 plus buildings. So if we match that, or even, we say it's 76% of that, I think we are capturing a significant portion of what was actually sold. We don't have every type of lender out there, and it's not refinancing. I get that as well, but it is in terms of new originations.
And also a change, I think, from last year is that the average portfolio size was $5 billion, so we're getting the larger sort of lenders. So there's 2 new.
Yeah, the 2 added a lot of, I think more teeth is the word used, because they are larger.
And I don't recall, I don't think so, but this certainly may help. Is Freddie and Fannie part of this discussion? Have they responded, or have they given any of their data?
They do. We do survey them. I think, at least one of them is included in the survey this year.
It may be worthwhile to push them a little bit, and I could help you strategize. And then, again, having the Fed or any of the regulatory agencies intercede on our behalf would certainly galvanize additional interest in people to respond.
But in the data on the income and expenses, was it correct that you quoted income was down 19% for this group?
This was,
and the expenses were up 9%? I just want to understand.
Yeah, that's
those two
unusual compared to the prior year at least.
I think you're referring to the rent. The average rent was down 19%.
Yeah,
Right.
we do indicate in this that if you look at the, it's not, we don't consider it actually as accurate as the income and expense study, which looks at the same thing. And we mention that in a footnote, in an endnote. And not all 12 actually responded to those and provided those numbers, so it's actually even fewer. But it can vary greatly, influenced by so few lenders. It's
So it's just for clarification, it's a written survey. So when something comes back, there isn't a dialogue that follows it to say, we just would like to understand how.
We don't usually go into detail. I mean, if there's something really questionable, then we might follow up, but generally we accept their answers. And
Right.
the surveys, if you can read it on page 15, it's in
Yeah,
fine
no,
print.
I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah.
It just strikes me that a 19% decrease in income is a somewhat of a notable item, I would think. And even the expense at 9% is, even if we say expenses grow at 3 to 5%, is more than double what we would expect them to be.
Right.
So-
I'm not sure how the lenders assess this from their portfolio either.
Is it different because we surveyed different lenders last year than we got this year? So
But
the
probably,
change could be just because different lenders reported
think
different
definitely-
things from last year to this year, so that's why there could be
Yeah.
a variation. Because it makes sense if if the same lenders talk about their change, and there's some consistency. But if it's different lenders, there's people who didn't report last year are reporting this year. But are they included or the
Well,
new
in
lenders?
those figures, we do include cross-sectional. We don't we don't look at the longitudinal analysis of that information about rents and expenses. That we only looked at select data.
So someone says it's down 19%, they're saying it, or whatever.
They're not saying it's down 19%. That's our calculation. They report the income, they report their rent and their expenses, and we take an average of each of those figures and we calculate what the ratio is.
And this is
Not them calculating that.
This is income in the entire building, whether there's one rent-stabilized unit or 100. So they're giving us overall income and
Yeah,
expense. Right, rental income. So they could have one
Rent,
rent-stabilized.
not income.
Rent. They have one rent-stabilized unit versus 100 rent-stabilized units, and overall income could be down, but we don't know why. But there's the rent.
We don't examine it beyond that. We don't know, yeah.
So, because we're talking about buildings that contain anywhere from 1 to X rent-stabilized apartments.
Correct.
I think the reason all just points to that, the folks we added had a much bigger portfolio, and that's going to change there. I would imagine that's the biggest reason for those numbers being, the expense 9% up, and the other one, I think it's just the mix of lenders that were for the cross-sectional that we did this year.
Is there a way to
That's
break
why
that-
we do a longitudinal, so we see from year to year, what the same group
There
is
is the
doing.
longitudinal for rent and expenses?
We don't report that.
That we don't report for the
We only
longitudinal.
we only look at select data for longitudinal. We can certainly incorporate that into the longitudinal analysis.
And just on that data, are we breaking it down by borough?
Which data?
The income.
We don't actually report any of this by borough, actually, none of it.
So we don't know if it's down 19% where it's down 19% from. Could be up in certain places and down in other places, and we just won't know.
We just ask them citywide, so we don't measure. In the sales data, we look at that. That's available from finance, but we don't try to break it down by borough.
Could we look at the sales data the sales prices per unit per borough, so we know the change in the sales prices instead of clumping them together? Because I think it's valuable to know if the prices on the sales prices have changed dramatically or not.
Well, we
based
don't
on
actually.
borough.
Yeah, we actually. Maybe Andrew could explain further. We don't actually look at the change in sales prices. We report what they are each year.
We take a look at the medians. And if you go to Appendix 8 in the report, we have the 2014 median sales price and the 2015 median sale price by, citywide by borough and by building size. We do the percent change in sales. That's because it's the building,
But not the
there's
change in
enough.
price.
Yeah, I mean, you can calculate it, but we found they're medians. So when you're doing a percent change with medians instead of averages, it's not going to be real indicative because it depends where that median falls out. And especially if 1 year, in the Bronx, 6 to 10 unit buildings, there were 30 of them, and the next year there were 15 sales. If you take the median price, it's really to take the percent changes. They become quite, I think they become unreliable because if you had the same number of buildings sold year after year in each one of those, so we include the prices, so if you want to do the percent changes, but we're not, I don't feel confident including that because I don't think it says much because of the number of loans in those categories.
Why do you choose median versus like doing average sales?
Well, a perfect example is Manhattan. They sold Stuytown at $5 billion, so that average would have been
So skewed.
so skewed. So
Right.
some of these things can
Well,
really
that's
get
valuable
skewed by
for that data because of the sales per unit. So there's 11,000 units and the sales 5.4 billion. If you figure out what the average sales price per unit, that's an informative piece of information.
Yeah, we don't have unit size. Actually, we do have unit
have,
size.
yeah.
I'm sorry.
You mean building size? You mean number of, when you
Number
say
of
unit
units.
size, you mean number of units?
Yeah, number of units in the building. I mean, I guess something we could do is run the unit cost, I guess.
That might at least have some relevant value.
So what are you proposing be examined?
Just the unit cost for sales per borough per year.
So the sales price by unit size,
No, not
by
units.
number of units.
No, just by unit.
Divided out into
If you have a,
price and size, you don't mean unit size, you're not looking for
no, if
Just
there's
want sales price by borough? I thought,
a unit.
I mean the average
By borough.
sales price per unit.
I see, okay.
Right.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yes, Steve, yeah.
I have a question. The average interest rate that you calculated for 2016 of 3.97, what is the term? Because interest rates determine, term determines the interest rate. Is that a 10-year term?
We just asked for the average interest rate. We explain the terms in the appendix that each of them report. But yeah, we don't.
That's consistent with our numbers for 10 years. And so for the board, interest rates for a 5-year, which is oftentimes with a 30-year amortization, would be a little bit lower than
Yeah.
that, just as a NOI sort of
It's a very rough
relationship
estimate.
to debt
Yeah.
service.
And for you, has that gone down from last year to this year?
I'm sorry?
The rate, has that also gone down from last year to this year?
It's been more or less flat.
Pretty flat.
Yeah, but this is a historic low from this information. It's historically low interest rates, that's for sure. It's a nominal change.
You said that two of the lenders had different criteria for rent stabilized and non-stabilized buildings. What did they report as the differences?
I think we referred to that in Note 5. One basically had some higher financing and refinancing rates for stabilized buildings and a lower LTV ratio. And the second lender reported lower financing rates and debt service coverage and a higher LTV ratio for stabilized buildings.
Okay.
Actually, Steve, to answer your point in Appendix 3 on page 13.
Appendix 3.
Yeah, for example, if you look at lender 401, they had a 30-year term, that was the highest interest rate, 5.7%. So there is, and I don't know how many.
It's the amortization that matters.
Right. So as it seems as though the terms grow,
Yeah, I'll look at this.
you take a look at that and you can see which way the interest rates go depending. That's how they answered, but I don't know how many.
I mean, they're not competitive.
I'm not sure. Yeah, you could see how, if they answered how many loans. They didn't say how many loans they put. They didn't indicate how many loans they made, so I don't know how
could
much
be.
it represents.
Brian, just on the foreclosures, I'm wondering if you've been able to track that there's been, compared to the overall market of zero buildings have gone into foreclosure proceedings. I wonder how that relates to the overall market conditions. If there's a way to track, because I know this is the second year we've seen no buildings in foreclosure from our study. I want to be clear that's indicative of what's happening in the larger market.
I'd have to look into that. I couldn't say here.
You're talking about the overall rent stabilized market or just the overall market?
I mean, I think it would be good to have both information. I'm not sure we can get the overall rent stabilized market, but if our study is for 12 lenders and there are no foreclosures, that's informative. But if it's not relevant to what we're seeing in the larger market, that would be helpful for us to know. I anecdotally know that foreclosures are down, but I don't want to make that assumption that's actually supported by any real data.
It could also be in workout in the pipeline. It takes a long time, so that's not captured. It's only foreclosures, so. Right.
Oh, well, it might be captured in non-performing, though.
Yeah, there's really low non-performing. So the question really is that's what we're seeing in the larger market? Because we only have 12 lenders who are reporting.
Right, the universe isn't large enough.
Right.
Freddie and Fannie would have better data for that if they're willing to share it.
Okay, other questions on the mortgage study?
I'm just wondering, can you try to get that, Brian? It might be helpful to.
Well, definitely we'll look into it and try to get that. Yeah.
I know the Furman Center did a report on that not recently. I don't know if they update it every year. But during the whole foreclosure crisis, they did that. And they found that, multifamily buildings, there weren't many.
Right. So the 1 to 4s.
They have value.
Yeah, they during that whole period, they maintained,
Yeah, someone buy before they go to foreclosure.
right.
Right.
So
And
I
then maybe
don't-
we look at the tax lien data. Maybe there's other data that's indicative of the problem, like whether there's, I know on the 1 to 4s, tax liens are down, but foreclosures are still up in the 1 to 4 family homes. So maybe we'll use.
Sorry, I can't quite understand you. Can you speak a little bit
Sorry.
more slowly?
I'm thinking we look at foreclosure data as well as tax lien data, and maybe having those two factors may be able to help us. I mean, if we can pull out the 1 to 4 family homes and just kind of look at the multifamilies, there might be information that might be useful to figure out if this is a trend that we should see, that there's lower foreclosures and lower tax lien sales.
Yeah, we track that in the housing supply, the tax lien sale. I mean, it's way down than what it used to be. The city barely owns any buildings and units anymore. There's a third-party transfer system that they use that's been very effective. The city doesn't hold much.
Well, it's true, they don't foreclose, but they still sell their tax liens to a third party who either foreclosed
Yeah.
or not. If that tax lien data is reduced, that'll be good information. I know the Center for New York City Neighborhoods has a report on the 1 to 4 family home tax lien data, but not on the multifamily.
Yeah, I think, we generally cover that in the housing supply, but we'll take a closer look.
Additional questions? No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, so we can move to additional board business and discussion. First of all, I want to thank everyone for their flexibility with respect to revising our schedule, which I think is going to help deal with the pressures of the last week or so, or 2 weeks of our work. And I thought this would be a good opportunity for Andrew to report on the efforts to find a location in Upper Manhattan.
So we started looking into a location in Upper Manhattan. We actually went to the government building. The space that they use is now been, I don't know, downsized is the right word. There's this big L-shaped room that they use. The big part of the L Like if you got your L here, the bigger part, is not available anymore because it's under, I guess, contract for leasing. I believe they're going to make a cafeteria out of it or something like that. So it leaves the smaller part of the L, and I'm not sure if it's big enough. So we started to look into some other venues. Our biggest lead so far is the National Black Theater, which is right down the block from that. I don't know if has anyone ever been there before? It holds like 250. It's got its own sound. It's air conditioned. So that is a promising lead. We have to go see it, obviously. The other issue with the doing it at the government building is there is no sound system. They informed us. So we would have to rent sound. So the cost of doing the National Black Theater is not much more than bringing our own sound in. So we will look into that. We also looked into the Schomburg Center. They're not available that week.
What about
So-
the Studio Museum or City College? City College is much further north, but
Studio Museum.
right across the street from the state office building. I don't know if they have an auditorium, they might.
Studio Museum, okay. I could take a look there. I mean, I'm hopeful they were receptive to our
Yes.
inquiries at the National Black Theater, so it's our intent to go there next week and take a look.
Are they available both the 14th and the 15th, do you know?
Yes, they are available the 14th or the 15th, so.
Great, okay.
From my understanding, I've somebody else on my staff is looking into it because I've been a little busy with the price and next and a few other things. So now I can focus more time on it. So, but they're both promising, and I think, we'll see.
Can we check if the theater has steps to go up and down?
Yeah, we'll look at all that stuff. Yeah,
That was an issue. Not having rails and
we'll take a look.
And just know that, Kathy, since our schedule's now more open, should we also look at, instead of squeezing them into that week, should we look at it as the option of the week of the 20th as another backup date? So we do 2 one week and 2 the next week?
It's available as far as I'm concerned. One other thing that Andrew suggested we talk about is whether we want to move up the final vote, which had been pushed to the 29th again because of my prior vacation plans. And the reason for doing that would be to give us some cushion in the event that we have to reconvene. So that availability might be used for that purpose.
I would strongly like if we can move it up, if that's possible. It's currently June 29th, correct?
It
If
is.
there's any flexibility on the board, I would appreciate it.
To the 27th, back to the 27th?
It was originally the 27th. We could try to do that. Remember, we have to circulate proposed, what the board is going to consider three days prior to the vote. So it's nice not to have that 3-day period during our public hearings because I think it's not reflective of still listening to testimony. So
Well, then
that's,
if we have the final public hearing on the 20th, and then we will have plenty of time.
we will have plenty of time, obviously, right?
Then we do I just prefer I can't do the 14th now, so I prefer the 15th. But if we end by the 20th, that's great. And then by the 20th, we have all our public hearings, and we have enough time to submit whatever we want by Thursday or Friday, whatever your deadline is.
Any further thoughts on moving the final vote to the 27th?
That's fine.
No, thank you.
Can we just have a vote? All in favor of moving to the 27th?
Aye.
Unanimous, okay?
If I have one. So what are you want to talk about that?
About the... Yes, well, I've privately talked, I think, just about everyone about having the 20th be Midtown during the day, so to speak, and having the Upper Manhattan meeting be in the evening, so that we would have 2 Manhattan public hearings. And my understanding is that everybody is on board with that. One of us not as happily as the others, but nonetheless supportive of that.
I'm a team
So
player.
I think we can, unless I hear something to the contrary, we'll finalize that. Great, thank you.
So then looking into dates, for the Upper Manhattan, we're focusing on the 15th at this point and not doing it
Yes.
going into that next week, well, in the hearing
I
on the
think that
20th?
makes sense to try to get the 15th. I think we'll have plenty to do the week of the 20th. So any other observations, questions, requests, et cetera?
Doing 15th instead of 14th now.
We're focusing on that, yes.
Focusing on the 15th. Hopefully, yeah, it sounds like it's available there, but, hopefully it works out.
So any thoughts, observations, questions, general discussion of the reports that we've received?
I just wanted to follow up on the simultaneous translation. I don't know what help you need, if anything, about with translation equipment or...
Yeah, we're in the process of getting pricing. The pricing is with interpreters.
And we'll bring the equipment.
My understanding, you guys had the equipment, correct? I didn't price equipment. But it doubles everything. So the question is, do we want that available at every hearing, or, that was only 4 hearings that I did it for. So, if we add another hearing, then it's going to increase the cost as well. So, we're still gathering costs, and maybe we can negotiate one, but I guess the question is, do we want the translation equipment at all of them? I still haven't had a chance to look at all the other options of including other languages yet, so I don't know. That would be an additional cost if we're going down that road as well. And adding another hearing period and paying for it is adding additional cost. So there is a limit to the resources. We have a budget that can incorporate a lot of this, but I don't know if we can do all of it, so it depends on how we can finagle everything.
Is there some way we can prioritize this?
I was gonna make some suggestions. So I feel like we would need probably 2 interpreters in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens. We didn't have as many Spanish speakers testifying. But I think we still need 1 interpreter, not 2. If that makes sense.
Right.
The Lower Manhattan also maybe 1, not 2, because most of other languages that were spoken were Salvation and Chinese. And then I'm thinking the Upper Manhattan, we would need 2 interpreters for sure.
I just don't even know if we need one.
What time? They did bring members who testified.
But if we had the equipment, we could just have, depending on what the language of the organizer, that we'd have the organizers help to it.
Yeah, I think that's.
But you won't have enough languages because you only have 1.
Right, well, we have multiple channels
Okay.
from all over different equipment. We just
So
have
do you
to-
want to share with us this deliberation?
I'm just trying to think of if Woodside on the Moose has a certain, so we're just talking about the actual equipment and how many languages we could actually have happening in each hearing. So for Queens, we would probably need, if we were to do interpretation in all languages, which most of the organizations can bring some of their own equipment, and we at CASA have some, UGC has some, all of us could find interpretation equipment. We would just have to be on different channels for all the different languages to have the same access. And I know that you guys are right now figuring out what the Spanish to English would be, but it is a conversation that we could have with other groups around what languages they think that they could bring interpreters for, depending on what the organization is.
Well, we have 2 different issues. One is simultaneous,
Right.
and how important that is in various locations.
Right.
And then having an additional language, 1 or more than 1, in whichever location. So do you have an idea of what let's just put it this way, the ideal situation would be?
We could actually get something to you by tomorrow at 3, literally.
Okay.
By borough, what languages people try to testified in last year, or where in an ideal situation, people would actually testify if we had the
Right.
language available.
And if you have any numbers in terms of the number of people who testified in those languages, I think that's important as well. I mean, if we have 3 people who testified in a certain language, I don't know that we can justify the expense of bringing in an interpreter.
Do you have that data from last year where people needed the interpreter last year of who need, because clearly in the Bronx, that was.
It's Queens is the issue.
Queens, it seems like the Bronx and Brooklyn and Upper Manhattan are no-brainers to me. It's really the question whether Queens or Lower Manhattan last year had enough volume that required it, or just the organizer could translate do simultaneous on their own, depending on if they had their members there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we could look to see who used an interpreter. I think that we marked that down somewhere. I mean, I'm pretty sure we do. I don't want to say 100%, but, I mean, in Queens, I know that where there was an issue, particularly with, I guess it was Mandarin or something, there was a translator there. So, you know, we were able to hear their testimony. I guess it's a question of, you know, I'm not sure. I'd have to see whether it's in the transcript, whether it's indicated that someone was translating.
It should be.
Maybe it may not be, yeah, but I don't,
I don't know if
I'll
that's a
see
good-
if we have that or not.
I don't know if it would be a good indicator to look back at years because of the fact that we didn't have it professionally done or advertised, or we're in the second year of providing this service, it's really intentional. I think that citywide, people are going to be more encouraged to testify just because now it is a given that an organizer doesn't have to testify for you. And just to say, organizers we're great at giving tests, being able to say what people said, but I think that people speaking for themselves and having someone professionally do that actually changes people's ability or encouragement of actually testifying. So I do think that the numbers are going to be a little different this year, and we're going to see a higher number of Spanish speakers because it's something that we've done 2 years in a row. And I think that if we did that in Queens and maybe Lower Manhattan in the different languages that they need, I think that their members would be more encouraged other than my organizer who picked me up at whatever time after I got to work is now going to interpret for me, and one person did it, and now I don't want to make her do it again because that's not her job, kind of thing.
All right,
So I
you're
feel
saying languages.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that the primary concern is around Spanish and Mandarin.
Right.
Is that right?
Oh, until you get to Queens. Queens is a tricky one.
Well, Queens, they speak 130 or 150 different
I think we
languages.
had 3 different languages in Queens. Spanish
And Korean,
and Korean. Oh, Minkwon.
Kwan, and they brought a number of people.
Yeah.
But they provided translation.
Right, and they had an actual interpreter come with them, which is different.
So I think the message is, as long as they have the equipment, if the groups can bring in an interpreter, I mean, I think you have a limited budget.
Right.
The priorities are, I think, those places, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Upper Manhattan.
Okay, well, let's
And
see if we can- I'm
If
sorry.
we can add more than that, if there are resources, that's great, but those are the priority areas, right?
Let's see if we can get some information on usage. If it's available, that would give us some indication, understanding that usage would go up if people understood that they had that service available. And if you can get a specific proposal to Andrew so that we can look at that, that would be helpful.
You want to pass this out? I didn't-
Yes. Andrew and I put together what I call a cheat sheet.
See, they're just, yeah, these are some of the main points from each of the reports so far this year. And going back actually 4 years. You know, we can add to this as we go along as well, but it just sort of summarizes where we're at and includes HVS data as well, the table of the most current HVS
You
data.
send it electronically also?
No. To everyone but you, Steve. Yes, I can send it a link.
Just feeling left out.
So, any further comment, observations, questions, suggestions, substantive or procedural, welcome at this point.
I'll make a motion to
It's called adjourn.
adjourn and convene. I would say, oh, no, thank you.
Motion to skedaddle.
I want to get out.
Okay, I'll second the motion to adjourn. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much. See you next week. You're welcome.